So today is Friday, December 15th. It is 10:20 a.m. My name is Ross Caputi and I'm conducting an oral history interview with Robert A. Salvatore. This is for the Sognadoro collection in the Center for Italian Culture Archives at Fitchburg State University. Mr. Salvatore, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Just a quick administrative thing. Would you mind saying and spelling your complete name?
It's Robert Anthony Salvatore. And I think you can do the first two, but the last one would be Salvatore.
Sure.
And my dad said Salvatore, but when I went to Italy, they all yelled at me and said it's not.
Salvatore.
Salvatore.
What's your birthday?
My birthday is January 20th.
January 20th.
Every 4 years, I get a new president for a birthday present.
Hey, not bad.
Sometimes bad, sometimes good, you know.
What's the year again?
1959.
1959.
Yeah, I'm old. Medicare this year on my birthday.
All right. Can we start with a little bit about your family? What did your parents do? Where were they from? How many siblings did you have?
Yeah, well, my mom's French.
Yep.
She came down in the dispersion when all the Catholics got kicked out of France. Clegon girl. She was born in Nova Scotia. Grew up in Clegon, like I said, very young. She came here very young. My dad's from Abruzzo in Italy, but he was born in the States. I think he was the only one. Maybe one of his sisters might have been born here as well. But my grandfather came over here in like 1910, 1912, established himself, brought the family over. And my dad was the youngest of seven, and I'm the youngest of seven. My dad had 6 sisters. I had 5, and a brother, all older. Like I said, I was the youngest. My dad came here, and he and his father were making bricks. They were doing the labor, like most of the immigrants that came over at that time. And my dad was quite brilliant. So was my mom, actually. But my dad had to drop out of high school in the 30s to help support the family. And I didn't know too much beyond that until recently when we started doing some digging. And I found out things like my aunts, my dad's sisters helped build St. Anna's Church in Leominster.
No kidding.
Yeah, they were the committee that helped get that going. They were on it. And I found out my grandfather had been running a speakeasy in the house that I was living in when I was born. There was a 3-decker that my dad inherited, and then we built a house right next door up on Florence Street in Leominster. Grew up in Leominster in the Italian section. Everyone in my neighborhood pretty much had a vowel at the end of their name. But even though it was the Italian section, almost all of my friends had French mothers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
It was all the Leominster guys grabbing the Fitchburg girls and vice versa. I think it was So we were just a middle class family. My dad worked for Selig's as an upholsterer for many years, and then the company folded, and he wound up working for the post office for the last 10, 12 years of his working career before he retired. He was old. When I was born, my dad was in his late 40s.
Oh wow. Okay.
Or mid 40s. My mom was in her late 30s. That's the youngest of 7.
Yeah.
And so that led. It was a very different dynamic for me. I almost look at my family as having 4 different generations among my siblings, because my oldest 3 sisters were 15, 13, and 10 years older than me.
Yeah.
And the way they grew up was very different than the way I grew up. They really grew up in the American graffiti, at the hop culture of kids. And then you have my 4th, the middle child of my family, my sister Susan, and my brother Gary grew up really in the late 60s. And they were the Woodstock group. Very different everything around them. And then my sister Jean, who was the closest to me, is 4 years older than me, but I hardly ever saw her because she kept skipping grades. And so she had kind of a unique upbringing compared to the rest of them. And then my upbringing was entirely different.
Yeah.
I'm considered a boomer, but really my part of the boomers, the 59 to 63 or whatever it is now, really grew up more like Gen X. We had TV, we had a lot different, very different than my siblings.
Yeah.
Having said that, I wasn't close with my siblings as a kid, but as I got older, they were everything.
Just because of the age difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, my sister was out of the house my oldest sisters were out of the house when I started getting memories about being alive.
Yeah.
My sister they were both in college when I was 5. And so I I was alone a lot as a kid. I think that's part of the reason I'm a writer, is because I had to use my imagination. Because you only had one car back then.
Yeah.
My mom had a friend up the street, and she had a son who was about 10 months younger than me, named Ross, Rossi Amico. We're still friends. I love the kid dearly. We grew up together side by side pretty much, but most days it was me and a box of toys in my living room when I was very little.
Yeah. Once you got older, did you have friends in the neighborhood?
Tons. We had a gang. It was Rusty Tata and Rossi Amico, Jody Carolis, Jill Faley, Chrissy Perla, Danny Mallard, Lenny Mallard. Yeah, we had a group. The Kellys, Peggy and Mike Kelly. It was an amazing place to grow up because I grew up right next to a cemetery, St. Anna St. Leo Cemetery, right on 117 in Leominster. And the back lot, big flat field, probably 300 plus feet by 200 plus feet, had no graves. Yeah. So we played baseball down there, we played football down there, we played soccer. Well, we didn't play soccer. We played baseball and football down there, and we played capture the flag down there. And we were respectful of the graves and everything. These were our friends and family. Everyone knew each other. We weren't going to do any damage down there. But that was where everything, that was where if you got a can of beer, you would sneak down there. First dates, first kisses down there, all of that in the cemetery. But it was a great neighborhood to grow up in. We had the woods. In fact, one of my books is called The Woods Out Back. And it actually is the woods between Mechanic Street and Lancaster Street in Leominster, which are now pretty much gone because they put the state pool there, the Southeast School is there, they extended Johnson Street right through there. But that was all woods when I was a kid. And we had BB guns. We'd go down there and, we just had a blast. It was a wonderful place to grow up. We had a vernal pool down the bottom of the hill where we could go skating, and that was when it was cold enough to skate. We had a lot of fun. Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
What about in the house? Did you have a lot of Italian culture, Italian food?
We had a lot of Italian food because my Aunt Sue and Uncle Tony lived right next door, and so it was, we had a lot of Italian food. And the culture... My family was closer to my mother's family by the time I came along.
She was a ledger, right?
She was a ledger, yes. Yeah. She was one of 12. Huge family. All of them had, I just went to my Aunt Dot's 100th birthday party at Oak Hill Country Club a couple of months ago. And, we loved that. So they'd come over and play canasta and cribbage, and we'd go to the camp in Knockeg every summer in Ashburnham, where my Aunt B had a camp. We'd rent the camp there. But that was my mother's family. My dad's family was a little different. They were much closer to my family before, but then they all moved out. And so, my Aunt Corinne and my Aunt Emily and my Aunt Jenny, my Aunt Letty, they all lived out by Boston and stuff. I didn't see them that much. My Aunt Sue was very close to my family, Sue and Tony. And then the Romanos. Lena Romano was Lena Salvatore Romano. The Romanos, the Di Giovannis, and in that neighborhood, you're all family. Yeah. That's how you feel. It's like everybody knows everyone. Yeah. Every time I see Jack Selly from Lemon, first thing I say is, "Are you related to everybody?" And he says, "Yeah, I am," and he is. But that's the way it was. It was. Let's put it this way: when I was in kindergarten, my best friend was Joey Carolis, and I lived on Florence Street, and Joey was 3 blocks over, behind the school we went to, Lancaster Street School. I could walk. My mom would let me walk there alone at 6 years old because she knew we've been walking down Lancaster Street. There were eyes on me at every corner. Yeah. Very different world. Did that feel overbearing, or did it feel like safe? Awesome. Yeah. We had the St. Anna's Festival every year, and you saw everybody in the neighborhood. It was awesome. It was, you knew where you could go, where you couldn't go. You knew if you were going to be a little hellion raiding the garden and you got caught. Everybody was going to know you raided the garden, and everybody was watching you. But it wasn't overbearing at all. All right. Those were also turbulent years you were growing up. Civil rights were going on, Vietnam, Cultural Revolution, the hippie culture. Was any of that kind of like making it into the neighborhood? Well, it was making it into my family, my brother Gary and my sister Susan. Yeah. And it was funny because Gary was like a hippie and then protesting the war. And then he said, you know what? My friends are fighting over there. So he joined the Marines. But his group coming out of Parris Island was the first group that didn't go. He was ready to go. because he said, I can't just sit here and throw stones from a distance.
Yeah.
I got to know what's really going on if I want to talk about it like I know what I'm talking about. So he joined the Marines, but it didn't affect me directly that much because, I 67, 69, I was 8, 10 years old. My sisters were losing friends over there, and they were worried about their friends, and I saw that kind of anxiety in there.
Yeah.
My first memory, I think, was John Kennedy getting shot.
Really? Wow.
When I saw Walter Cronkite, that's when I went out and told my mom. I was like almost 4. So almost 4, almost 5. I was almost 5. And that's like my first memory.
Yeah.
And but what really hit home to me was when my brother-in-law came back from Vietnam. He was in the Marines, and we were really close, and he was a troubled guy.
Yeah.
He was a really troubled guy, and he had PTSD beyond. Nobody knew what it was back then.
Yeah.
Shell shock or whatever they call it. But he would outbursts, but he was like the gentlest guy with me. He taught me how to play chess. He took me fishing all the time, and I think I was one of the few people he actually told his war stories to. And a couple of the things that happened to him over there were just horrific. And he wound up wrapping a car around a tree.
Yeah.
And died soon after coming back. And it really touched me.
Yeah.
It really touched me because when he died, I was like 14, I think, and 14 or 15, and it really left a mark.
Yeah.
And that's when I first began to understand, because all of my uncles on my mom's side and my dad were all in World War II.
Yeah.
My dad was D-Day +6. He got wounded outside of Cherbourg. My uncle Herbie was in the cavalry in the Pacific, got machine gunned from hip to shoulder, somehow lived. But all of them, when we go to the camp and they were all sitting around, they didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
They didn't talk about it. I just found out one of my uncles, I just found out at the 100th birthday party that my cousin found a cassette tape that he had recorded before he died.
No kidding.
Chronicling his time in the war.
Wow.
And he was like in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, and he was an
kidding.
MP at the Nuremberg trials. But he was the quietest guy, the nicest guy you'd ever meet in your life. But I guess I got to get that cassette because I got to hear that.
Yeah.
But they didn't talk about it. And if you pried a little bit, then you got to understand what they went through. And I think that had a big effect on me. It had a big effect on me. You're going to talk about my column here. It had a big effect on me when I was writing that column. It has a big effect on the writing I do now in the fantasy genre.
Yeah. Yeah, I just started reading the Drizzt series.
Yeah.
And
Started writing those in 1987.
a character like that who has that sense of integrity in spite of, the community he's growing up in.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels very much to me like, it spoke very clearly to my own experience with the Iraq War.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I was going for.
Yeah.
And that's what I was going for. And, I've always been sensitive to the idea of cliques of people, culture, religion, color.
Yeah.
And it makes no sense to me. Gender makes no sense. None of that makes any sense to me. People are people.
Yeah.
And I respect everybody I meet equally, or I try to. And it's not like you have to earn my respect. It's like you have to unearn it.
Yeah.
And so all of that stuff always seemed really stupid to me growing up. My dad would tell me stories about when he was growing up, and they'd call, you're a wetback, Italian, and you got a knife and you're in the mafia. And I think the only time I ever saw my dad angry, because my dad didn't get angry. He just didn't. He had a little furniture store. It was more of a hobby. We weren't making any money on it because young couples would come in and you give them everything wholesale. Go. Oh yeah, I can get it for this price for you. And it's like, Dad, we gotta eat, man. But that was my dad. But one guy came in and accused him of being connected, and I never saw him that mad. And I mean, we knew people growing up in that area who were, but he was outraged. And that's the only time I think I've ever saw him angry in my life. Truly angry.
Yeah.
But all that stuff never made sense to me. All that stuff of war, racism, sexism. Never. Growing up with 5 older sisters, all of whom were brilliant. One was a salutatorian in the class, another was a valedictorian in the class, another was a nurse practitioner, should have been a surgeon, would have been an amazing surgeon. Another one who kind of dropped out of the world, my sister Sue, could take a shopping list like my mother and go like this and tell you the total. Just brilliant. My sister Jeannie's master's, teaches English in a college. She worked for, she was the one doing all the tech writing for the government, for military back down in Huntsville, Alabama at one point. But I grew up with strong, powerful, intelligent women. And so the sexism, the racism of the world never made sense to me. And it never will.
So all that stuff that was going on, the Cultural Revolution, these big, political upheavals, were these like dividing issues in the neighborhood?
Not really. I think a little bit, like my Aunt Sue was really mad at Gary for having long hair.
Yeah.
Because he had long hair. But not really. It was a pretty tight-knit neighborhood, and I think most of the people felt the same way. I think it was within the families there was you had a lot of, almost all the dads in my neighborhood fought in World War II or Korea.
Yeah.
And then now a lot of the sons and daughters are protesting the Vietnam War. So I think within the families, but it didn't really pop up in any bad ways in the neighborhoods.
So you didn't necessarily feel alone in your views?
Well, my views back then were, I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was 8 years old, 10 years old. I think that's where a lot of my learning came about the world at large.
Okay.
But no, I don't think, even though in my family we had I don't even know what we didn't really talk about it that much. There were some conflicts with my brother, but it was never anything really overwhelming.
Did you ever see any of the older Italians witnessing these changes going on and kind of like reacting to it, worrying that the Italian character of the neighborhood was going away, anything like that?
It happened. That happened later on, where the Italian character in the neighborhood really went away. Just like, at one point, South Lancaster Street was Italian and Mechanic Street was French.
Yeah.
Right? So Robert Cormier grew up on Mechanic Street. I grew up on Lancaster Street. Very different. But what you saw was there were a lot of tenement buildings that people owned. And, they would be renting. And then eventually they were selling them. And by the time I was at Fitchburg State, there were, like, the building my dad had owned, the three-decker that I lived in my first couple of years of my life, had been sold to a guy who sold it to another guy who was using it to bring Cambodians, Laotians, Vietnamese, even the Hmong, the Montagnards.
Yeah.
There was like a drop house for them to come over and assimilate while they got sent out to the wider community. So you were even seeing changes back then. And I think there was that the people that remained, the older Italians that remained, I didn't see a lot of resentment. It was more they held on to what they had. You'd still see the same types of Christmas decorations and all the, you know what I mean? That unique kind of Italian character that you see.
Yeah. Yeah, the doilies and the pizzios for Christmas and stuff like that.
But all of the people in my neighborhood were like, they all worked in the plastics factories, then started their own plastic factories, or had the vending machines, or had so they had their own businesses, and I didn't see a lot of clashes, I'll put it that way.
All right.
The guys who really when I was a kid, there were several older guys in our neighborhood. I don't know if it was dementia or addiction or whatever. They used to wave their guns at you a lot. No, I'm serious. I saw a kid get blown off his bike by rock salt.
What?
Yeah. He's riding down the street, got right down the end of Florence Street, and you heard the glass break. The guy stuck his gun through the window and blew him off the bike, and the bike kept going. He was lying on the side of the road crying.
Jesus.
I got chased away from the frog pond by a guy with his 20 gauge.
What?
Oh yeah.
Why?
Because and it's my dad's property.
Oh, I see.
But he chased us out, and the cops came down. Oh, he didn't load the gun. I said, I have a shotgun. I watched him load the gun. He loaded the gun. Don't tell me he didn't. I watched it. But I was a kid. They didn't listen to me. I just leave him alone. Another guy used to shoot people with his pellet gun. They raided his garden even more then. It was an interesting neighborhood.
So you mentioned, your early childhood, you were alone a lot, your siblings were much older. Is that kind of where your love for books began?
Yeah, I loved reading. When I started school, I had to deal with my mother. As long as I was getting straight A's, she'd let me miss 30 days, 40 days of school a year. And I'd stay home and I'd read my Charlie Brown books in particular. I love Charlie Brown, and the older I got, the more I loved them. Then I had my comic books and my Charlie, and I loved reading back then. And then school beat the reading out of me as I went through school because they were giving me books like Ethan Frome and Silas Marner and Moby Dick that really had they didn't call me at all.
Yeah.
And I actually started here as undeclared, but I was focusing on math and science because I was a math science guy,
Yeah.
big time. And so I was taking like calculus, even though I hadn't had any of the pre-calc, and I was taking, leaning toward math courses and computer science. And Jerry Johnson I had him. He still keeps in touch with me. He's a writer up in Vermont now, but he was teaching computer science back then. It was COBOL and Fortran and BASIC. Yeah, it's a long time ago. And my freshman year up here is when my sister gave me a copy of The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. That was 1977. So 2 months later, February 78, we had the blizzard of 78, and everything was shut down. You couldn't even leave your house. And I was trapped at my mother's house, 19 years old, happy, right? So I put on Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, and I was listening to The Chain. The sun was coming up, and I opened The Hobbit, and I read the Peter Beagle introduction to The Hobbit, and then I read the first line that said, "In the hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And I was immediately transported back to those Charlie Brown books under the covers when I was in first grade, kindergarten, first grade, second grade.
Yeah.
And my imagination started coming back to me. It was like I started remembering the joy of that.
Yeah.
And that's what started my love of the fantasy genre and creative gaming and writing.
And that all happened while you were at Fitchburg State.
First year.
Yeah.
I started writing in 82, right after I graduated when I started writing, because I had run out of fantasy books to read. There was no internet, so you couldn't just go and search and find all these fantasy books.
Yeah.
We had a Walden Books, there was a corner bookstore in Fitchburg, and there was a Pilgrim Books at the Kmart Plaza, I think it was. Or what? It was Kmart. And those were like the only bookstores. And if they didn't have, you had one bay that was science fiction fantasy, so you had Asimov and Bover and Clark and Heinlein and all the science, and down in the corner you had Tolkien, Terry Brooks, and Stephen Donaldson, and Anne McCaffrey. And that was it.
Yeah.
And so I ran out of fantasy books to read, so I just wrote my own. That's how I started. I didn't write it to get published. I just wrote it. My thought was, if I write this book, if I ever have kids and grandkids someday, my kids will be able to give this to the grandkids and say, this is your grandfather did this. I didn't think I was going to get published. I didn't even know how to type. I wrote it in a spiral notebook.
No kidding.
I had to hire my sister to type it for me. And it wasn't until after she did that, and I gave it to some friends, and they were like, this is really good. You should sell this. So I sent it out, and I got some horrible rejection letters. This was in the early 80s. You tell me I can't, and I'm going to prove you wrong or die trying. And that's when I just decided I'm going for this. Yeah. So even while I was having kids, building a family, having a full-time career, I made time to keep working on that. And that's what got me the gig in 1987 to work for the Dungeons & Dragons.
Now, at what point did your column Salvos with the Fitchburg State newspaper, did that come before reading and writing came back into your life or after? Oh,
that was, I'm trying to remember the years I did that. It was right around the same time. I was only here I started falling back. All my electives became lit courses after I changed to communications. I declared as communications major, and I was doing that soon after. So it was probably 79, I think, maybe, 79, 80. So that was after I had found the love of reading and writing again.
We have some of those column pieces in our collection downstairs in the archives.
Sure, I'd cringe,
you got some really interesting backlash for some of the columns you wrote on political topics.
Well, two of them.
Yeah, you remember that at all?
One was about the police, the campus cops.
Yeah.
Where there was a big fight going on, and there was a big movement to get rid of the long-handled flashlights.
Yeah.
Because they would use them as a weapon type of thing.
Yeah.
And I tried to be neutral on that, if I remember right. I haven't read it in 40 years, so I could be wrong. 40 years. But when they printed it, they put a cartoon on top of it of an overweight cop eating a donut on a tricycle And it was like the most insulting thing. I had nothing to do. I didn't even know until it came out. And of course, you know, I've learned the power. I was studying media. First impressions, everything. That's why you see so many stories nowadays with these ridiculous headlines. What? And then you read it, and it's nothing to do with the headline. Yeah. Right? You need the clicks, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, they needed the clicks, I guess. And oh boy, did I get hit for that one. I was fairly neutral. I wasn't even living here, so it wasn't. I was almost like an outside reporter because I was commuting.
Yeah.
I was up here for my classes, and then I was at the nightclub working as a bouncer, and I was at the plastics factory, and I was wherever to get whatever job I was doing at the time, trying to pay to come up here.
Yeah.
Which was a lot easier back then. But yeah, I took a lot of heat for that one. And then the other one was about the bombing of Tripoli in Libya, I believe. And this goes back to watching my brother-in-law and the whole Vietnam thing. And my uncles, my dad, and they're talking about the experiences of war. And the one thing I always admired was that my father and my uncles didn't lose their humanity. They didn't lose their humanity. You know, and a lot of people do.
Yep.
And so when I saw people cheering the shoot down of the jets, the Libyan jets, I understood. I wasn't trying to get so much into why we did it, whether we should have done it, whether we shouldn't have done it. What I was really talking about was feel bad that you just watched human beings die. Because the guys in those jets were just people.
Yeah.
They were doing what they thought was right for their country. You know?
Yeah.
Feel bad. Do what you got to do, but don't lose your humanity. But, you know, in times like that, a lot of people don't take it like that.
Yeah.
So I took a lot of shit. You know, life is life. I don't care. If you're going to be a writer, being a writer means you're walking down Grand Central Station naked at noon.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is. If you can't take the heat, don't be a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm skipping ahead a little bit in our question timeline here, but being a fantasy, right? You know, fantasy fans, sci-fi fans, they often have pretty intense reactions.
Oh, gee, I think.
Yeah. You know, around the time that, like, you know, the internet was becoming part of our lives, what was it like being a new fantasy author?
I wasn't new then. I was about 6 years in,
Yeah.
7 years in.
Okay.
It was awful. It was awful for all of us. Because when people have to sit down and write you a letter, they're generally going to be more polite.
Yeah.
When they're on the internet anonymously, we call it internet spying, they'll say things to you they would never say to your face.
Yeah.
And it can be hurtful. And at one point, it was so bad with the new authors coming in that publishers were like asking people like me who had thought we had figured it out, but we really hadn't, to kind of help other people keep their feet on the ground with good reviews and not get buried by bad reviews.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There are other agendas at play here,
Yeah.
one way or the other.
Yeah.
Just this person loves your book does not make you the best writer ever, and this person hating your book doesn't mean you're worthless. You have to find that middle ground. Don't read the reviews.
Yeah.
I say that, but that's not the way it works. I don't read them anymore, but it took me many years. It actually took me, my brother dying of cancer, right around the time my Star Wars book came out, where I had been tasked with killing Chewbacca. And oh my gosh, the letters I got were just vile. There were people running around the internet giving me phone calls, giving me 1-star reviews on every book I had ever written, and they were just saying the most horrible things to me, about me. And I was trying to deal with the grief of losing my best friend and my hero, my brother. And I'm getting these letters about a fictional character. How could you, death threats.
Death threats.
Oh yeah. It was pretty interesting times. And at one point, a few months after this, I would go to Amazon and I would just read 1-star reviews. And it took me a year to realize that what I was doing is I didn't want to deal with what was really hurting me. So I would make up things, I would use the reviews as, this is why I'm angry, this is why I feel bad. No, it was because I lost my brother. Yeah, and so those reviews became almost like a substitute for me. But then when I finally dealt with my grief, when my wife finally said to me, "Listen, you gotta get over this. You've got kids. You've got his kids that you're supposed to be there for."
Yeah.
And when I finally got through all of that, that's when I realized how worthless the talk really was. Yeah.
So let's go back and talk about your family a bit. When did you meet your wife?
I met my wife at Partners Pub in early January 1982. It was a blind date. My friend, one of my best friends from high school, Jimmy Kennedy, was dating a girl named Carla, and Carla's best friend was Diane, and she was single, and she was the third wheel. So I was in a risk game with my brother Gary, my father, and my brother's friend Vinny. And Jimmy walks in my house. He goes, "Come on, you're coming out with me." I'm like, "I'm in the middle of a risk game." My dad had just done his typical. When he got tired of playing, he would throw all his weight to one side, whether he wanted Gary to win or me to win. So like all of a sudden, he's hitting every border I have, like in these suicide runs. And so I was going to lose anyway. So I said, "All right, I'll go." And I went down to Partners Pub and I met Diane. And it was kind of a slow burn because my car was broken down again. And we didn't we talked on the phone a lot. We didn't see each other much in the first month or so. But I knew pretty quickly and it only went from there. We've been married a long time, 40th anniversary coming up. And, we're still happy. We've got 3 kids, 8 grandsons, no granddaughters, which is really weird. But, I grew up in a family and I have a family.
That's fantastic.
And I love it. And it's not for everybody, but for me it is.
That's great. Now, when you guys met, were you already like an aspiring writer?
Not right. Well, I was thinking about it because that's when I was running out of books. So I had actually, like a couple of months later, I started my book. First book I wrote was called Echoes of the Fourth Magic. I'm trying to get them back right now from the publisher because I want to put them out on my own. They're still out there. But so Diane would come to my house. My dad would be downstairs watching the Red Sox. And she'd be like, "Why aren't you working on your book?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I want to," because I wasn't working that night at the club, so I had time. "Go work." And she'd hang out with my dad. She was very understanding about it the whole time. I mean, when I got my first contract was in the summer of '87. We had a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and she was pregnant. And she would take the kids and get out of the house so I could work, every spare minute working. And it wasn't for the money because that first book, I think the contract was $2,000 and a 1% royalty. It wasn't going to change your life.
Yeah.
It was a nice boost in money for us at that time, but it wasn't going to change your life. It was a lot of work, but she knew I wanted it, and so she supported me all the way through it.
Yeah.
And then the other time was a few years later after I had become quite successful with the hardcovers and everything. Had a big fight with the publisher, hated the editor, he hated me. And when I said no and I refused the contract, it was like, we may have, this is going to be bad. Because as you make more money, your expenses go with it.
Yep.
And now all of a sudden we're in the house with a bigger mortgage and we've got cars that we have car payments on and all the rest of it. And what am I going to do if I'm not writing? I hadn't been in the workforce for, at that point, 4 years. What are we going to do? And she said, "We made it before, we'll make it again. Don't worry about it. Do what you got to do."
Yeah.
So she's been there the whole way. It's a partnership.
Yeah.
In fact, she runs the web store. rasalvastore.com is the plug. Thank you. Diane won't get mad at me for not plugging it. If you want to buy signed books, that's the place to go. She did that as a service to my readers more than anything else. She's it's been a good, not a lot of complaints.
Yeah. What do you think it was like for your kids having a really successful dad?
They didn't care.
They didn't care.
They didn't care. Yeah. My daughter called me the king of the nerds.
Are they also fantasy fans?
My sons are.
Yeah.
Well, one of my sons, they both, my sons worked for me. My daughter did too, but they were actually my copy editors. Really bright kids. I can brag about them. When I get the call in 2006 from Kurt Schilling, the pitcher.
Yeah.
He's starting a video game company.
That's right.
He says, I get a phone call. I'm actually doing an e-signing. A guy in Pennsylvania was running a website back then, and he would take orders, and he'd come up with all the books, and I'd sign them, personalize them, so he could ship them out. I was in the middle of an e-signing, the phone rings, and Diane hands me the phone. She goes, "This is for you." And I pick it up, he goes, Hi, is this Bob Salvatore? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, oh man, I can't believe I'm talking to you. You're like my favorite author. This is Kurt Schilling. And I went, F you. I thought it was one of my friends screwing around. Dan's like, oh, it's really him. His publicist called earlier. And he's like, hey, he told me to start in a video game company. He wanted me to come in and help design the world. And I joined 38 Studios. Well, right around this time, my son was a philosophy major at Tufts, my oldest son, Brian. And he was going on the message boards anonymously for a company called Mythic down there. I think they were in Virginia or North Carolina. And they were doing a game called Dark Age of Camelot. And he was actually working with them to help the classes as a player.
Uh-huh.
And they were going to offer him a job. And he was actually going to go to law school. And Diane talked him out of it and said, all your life you've been designing games. You want to be a game designer. Do it. You know how hard that is? She goes, well, you have connections to at least get looked at.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, Mythic had pretty much hired him. But then Kurt said, no, if he's going to be a game designer, he's not going there. He's working for me. So Brian went in and did an internship with Kurt. And then he took to it. And he was doing great when the company finally collapsed a couple of years after that. Brian was one of the two mechanics designers, balancing classes, monsters, all of that in the game. There was him and one other brilliant guy, Danny, really doing all of that. And then when it collapsed, he wound up going to a different company, and now he's like the primary guy on one of the biggest, if not the biggest game in the world. And he's made a name. It's funny because we went to a guitar store. This is great. He's into guitars. He's got like 10 guitars. That's his thing. It's the only thing he'll drive a 20-year-old car, but he'll have 10 brand new, beautiful guitars. We went to this specialty guitar shop in Connecticut, and we get in there, and he's talking to the guy, and he's telling him about his job and stuff. And I'm on the other side talking Fleetwood Mac with the guys at the desk, and the guy comes walking over and goes, that's your son over there? I said, yeah. He goes, he's a big deal, you know. And I said, well, yeah, I know. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
My son Gino's written a few books with me. He's done some game design. He worked at 38 Studios on the narrative team for a while. But he wanted to be a dad more than anything else. And he got together with a girl he met in college, and she's got a great job. So they decided they were going to have kids, and he was going to be a stay-at-home dad and work part-time in the business. And now he's in law school because the kids are getting older, so he went to law school. And but he's a big gamer. He still plays every week with us. But he doesn't want to work in the industry at all.
Yeah. Now, you still live in Leominster, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Do your kids also?
No, one's in Lancaster, one's in Sterling, and one is currently living in my house in California, in Hermosa, Hermosa Beach, because she's in med school.
Awesome.
At UCLA.
That's great.
My daughter, Caitlin.
Yeah.
She had a rough go. She got married. Well, she was dating a guy. They were living together. They got married. He got sick. They had a kid. They thought they had more time.
Oh,
He died 9 days after the kid was born.
oh, that's awful.
That was 6.5 years ago. She soldiered on. And then a year later, she moved back to Massachusetts. They were living out in Redondo because he was working at SpaceX.
Oh, wow.
His dream job. He was there a few months and wound up with cancer. It was horrible. Just horrible. They lived with us for a year while he was going to Dana-Farber, and he was working in the office next to me. And like when I was watching the feed for the first time they landed the booster back on the ground, I was watching that feed in my office on the SpaceX feed with Ryan. Yeah, I miss him. But she went on and she said, you know what, after all we went through, she had started college in pre-med, then she moved over to business. She was doing real estate in California. She sold me a house up there, actually. And she said, you know, I think I could do a lot of good as a doctor. I'm going back to med school. So she started taking all the courses she needed before she could take the MCATs. She went to Harvard Extension School at night and took all the courses she needed and worked her ass off. And sure as heck, she got into UCLA. And now she's out there with a new guy. They've been together a few years. There's another local guy, and they're happy. They have 2 more kids. She just had a baby, so she has 3 out there now. And you can only be as happy as your least happy child.
Yeah.
And that's true old saying. And my kids are doing all right.
That's fantastic.
We're healthy. We're happy. We get through the world.
Was the decision to stay in Leominster for them, to be a dad and to have your family?
Partly it was for them because one of the things we always liked about Leominster was that it's very multicultural.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in the Italian neighborhood, you had the French neighborhood. I remember when I published my first book, my second grade teacher, Lucy Scaramuzzi, oh, she was so happy someone from our side of the tracks had made it, which kind of blew my mind because I didn't realize at that point that there were sides of the tracks because I didn't go through what they went through.
Yeah.
They went through the you're a wetback, you got a knife, that was the assimilation. But one thing we liked about Leominster is it's real world. You have a lot of people from Puerto Rico, from Brazil, from other places in the Caribbean. You have it's very multicultural. It's a gateway community, and so even when I started making really good money. We're like, let's go to Bolton. And it's like, let's stay in Leominster. The kids will get this is the real world. This is the world they're gonna deal with. So that was part of it. But the biggest reason I stayed in Leominster is because in Leominster I'm Bobby, and Bobby and RA are two different people. RA is the guy I am on the road. I get in front of people and I have to get rid of all my nerves and my I am not an extrovert. I'm an introvert. I didn't have a date in high school because I was too afraid to ask anyone out. It wasn't until I got to Fitchburg State and I realized my life was going by and I wasn't in it that I started fighting back against that. When I'm on the road and I'm in front of a convention or doing whatever, doing something like this, I'm RA. But in Leominster, I'm Bobby. I play softball. I coached all the teams, my kids, hockey, softball. I go down to Deck Hockey Center and Chris Hauser's like, Bob, you haven't seen it. Brings me upstairs, shows me all the things. I was on the first national champion cadet deck hockey team, which means we beat the three other leagues, called ourselves national champions. Franco Vets, yeah. It just, my roots to him, and even though I don't, like most of my friends are gone, they've moved on to other places now, and I don't really get out of the house all that much because I work at home, that's why I don't see people as much as I used to, but it's still home.
Yeah.
It's still home. I do love Southern California, though. I go out there a lot. I love it.
Yeah. So what's next for Bob Salvatore and what's next for R.A. Salvatore?
Bob Salvatore, my dad says Salvatore, American. Boy, guys in Luke are going to hit me when they read that. Bob Salvatore is trying to find a better life-work balance.
Yeah.
It's really hard. One thing I learned, because we had nothing, and when we got married, we had nothing. We were working. I was handing the keys to Diane when I was coming home from work after that graveyard shift, and she was heading out to work. We had one car. We were poor. We were lower middle class, working class. But we knew that if we worked hard back then, if you worked hard, you would get a better life. Now it's not, I think that's changed a lot. But what I learned through those years was the trap of success, the trap of suddenly making more money, because then you're expected to spend more money. It's like, you have to buy this house, you have to buy this car, you have to have this. Why aren't you wearing that watch? Because I have a Fitbit, I don't need a watch. Well, you should be wearing that Rolex. It's like, and it becomes almost like this, you kind of lose yourself in stupidity if you're not careful. And for me, it was always about security. I wanted to make sure that I was secure, and that if anything ever happened to my kids, they wouldn't wind up on the street.
Yeah.
That I'd have to find the risk, because that's how I grew up. You take care of that's the Italian, right? You take care of your family.
Yep.
And my kids don't want anything from me. They've told me a million times, thank you for paying for our education, because that alone puts them way ahead of most of their friends who have these outrageous college bills with loans that should be illegal and usurious. And I really wish when they start talking about forgiving student debt, they would explain to people my age that the loans that these kids took, probably signed by their parents, not even them, are horrific.
Yeah. And
you can never get out of debt. They're the kind of loans that used to be absolutely illegal. But anyway, I'm on my soapbox. I'll get off it for a minute. So for Bob Salvatore, it's more of reminding myself that, because at this point in time, I know that I can have everything I want for the rest of my life, because I don't want that much. Materially, I don't really want that much. I like having the nice car. I have the homes that I don't want bigger houses. I don't want, Diane and I don't need anything more materially. And we know we're secure, and we know our kids are all taking care of themselves. They don't need us. They're financially. They're building their lives the way we want them to. So I'm reminding myself it's okay to not work today. And that's the big struggle for me because that whole, you got to take care of your family. So I'd go to hockey games, and as soon as they'd go in between periods and the Zamboni come out, I'd break out my computer and I'm working. And I don't have to do that. But it's hard for my brain to, my heart says do it.
Yeah.
And my brain says, wait a minute, you don't have to. And I have to force the logic down to say, find a better work-life balance.
Yeah.
And so that's Bob Salvatore. For R.A. Salvatore, I don't know. Because it's like things are rolling along. The Dritz books Dritz just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I'll be shocked if there isn't going to be a TV show or movies or whatever, and that will triple my book sales, even if it's a terrible show. That's just such a wider reach. There's video games. I just licensed my Demon War books to a company that wants to do a virtual reality game. They've got a good track record, so that'll probably happen. I may do more Kickstarters. I may go to self-publishing because the industry has changed in so many ways that I don't like. I don't know, and now they keep bugging me to come teach up here a little bit, and I think that might be in my future a little bit too. So the work thing is like, what do I want to do? You want me to go to Europe? Okay, let's turn it into a trip to Europe that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Yeah. And it's just appreciating. I'm not giving up. I'm not saying I'm on Medicare now. I'm old. I'm going. I fight. I'm still playing softball. I'll fight this till the last day, last breath. I will fight age. I want to be active. I want to have fun. I'm still weightlifting. I'm still playing softball. I'm still being active. My grandkids come over. We spend the whole time they're there. They're like between 7 and like the youngest 3, 4, and a couple of 7-year-olds and a 6-year-old who's in California. But whenever they're at the house, the whole time they're there, I'm chasing them around the islands in the kitchen. We're just romping around the house, having fun, or we're in the pool in the summer, just swimming all day long.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
And that's what I want, and I appreciate what I got. I've been incredibly fortunate to have a talent that, and this is the other thing too, and this is my message to everybody out there. The idea of special people insults me. I don't buy it. I don't believe it. People have value. I don't care if you're, waiting tables, building rock walls, writing books, president of a company, whatever. I just don't buy this class bull at all. I don't. I happen to do something I love that for some reason I don't even know. I'm apparently pretty good at it, and they pay me to do it. I don't work harder than anybody else. I probably work a lot less hard than most people and I don't take that for granted. It's been I keep pinching myself and wondering when the devil's going to come and collect, and when did I make this deal with him anyway? And that's how I feel about the world. That's my view on the world. So I just am trying to remind myself, you worked hard. You, in this day and age, we're very fortunate to have something that paid well. For what you love to do, that's winning. And it's every successful person out there, they work hard, they're talented, everybody's talented somewhere, and they're lucky. And so I don't take that for granted.
Any closing thoughts? Anything else?
No, I just, actually, my soapbox.
All right.
Watch out for disinformation sites. I can't stress this enough. I studied Marshall McLuhan when I was up here. The communications department at Fitchburg State was A+++++. We were one of the best in the country, one of the first in the country. Lee DeNike and Dave Ryder and John Magnasco and that whole crew was just fantastic. I had some of the best professors you could imagine up here, and we studied theory. We learned about the power of communication up here. And what I'm seeing now is terrifying to me. The misinformation that's being put out there under the guise of satire. It's not. Disinformation. And they're tearing the world apart. watch out for it. Fact check everything. Be a good citizen. A good citizen is an informed citizen. And we really need people to pay attention because the issues are huge.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say which side or the other. I'm not going to get into that kind of a fight. But I'm just saying, go to the source material. Find out what you're talking about.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for being part of this.
It's my pleasure.